Right, is everyone back? If anyone's not here, put your hand up. Cool. Right. Uh, First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. Thanks very much to Alex for inviting me along, and thanks to Robert Waters for hosting. No technical demonstration from me today. It is just going to be PowerPoint, so apologies. Flip side of that, I'm going to try and make it a little bit interactive. So there's going to be various questions at various points during this, which I'm going to throw into the audience. I'm not going to pick on any individuals. It's just going to be show of hands type stuff. Okay. So get the clicker working. The boring bit about me, Alex did quite a good job at this, but just to introduce myself. Firstly, who came along to the talk I did at the user group in March? Anybody here that was at that? Okay, cool. Those that are observant might notice I've got different coloured slides this time. I have recently moved roles. So I now work for Advancing Analytics as a consultant. We are a consultancy that specialises in data engineering and data science. I've recently joined as an analytics specialist, which basically translates as Power BI nerd. You can check out Advanced Analytics. They've got a YouTube channel. We specialise. Anyone come across the term data lakehouse? It's a new fab trend. Awesome. One of our founders and directors, Simon, has a YouTube channel where if you want to go find out about data lakehouse, it's the place to go. It's the chap on this t-shirt. So you want to find about data lakehouse and Spark, check out Advanced Analytics on YouTube. I also run my own website and YouTube channel as well, where I basically nerd out about Power BI type stuff. So as has already been mentioned, I've been working as a data professional for 15 years now, and it happened by accident. I don't come from a technical background. I was studying politics and philosophy at university, and then I dropped out to be a barman, and then later found myself working various office jobs. Ended up in a finance admin office where I turned into a bit of an Excel nerd, and kind of having caught the data bug from there, that's kind of where my data career developed. So moved into more technical roles, working in business intelligence. That's been across a range of industries. So I did quite a long time working in the defence industry for BAE Systems. Alex mentioned I previously worked for AO.com, and that was predominantly as a BI developer working with Microsoft technologies. So in the old days, that was SQL Server, integration services, analysis services, reporting services, and a bit of Power BI as well. Last couple of years, I've gotten to get involved with some of the cloud-based technologies. So using Azure Data Factory, a bit of Databricks. And my last couple of years has been working in consultancy. So again, the consultancy I work for now, we specialise in lake houses, but I am at heart still a Power BI nerd. So a little bit of context and background for this talk. I'm here at a Power BI user group. So always the intention and the inspiration for this was coming from that Power BI type background in terms of designing a star schema. Now, I guess the reasons for that, anyone know who this is? First show of hands. A couple of people. So this is Jeffrey Wong. He works as a software engineer for Microsoft. He's often credited as being one of the inventors of DAX. So you can all blame him. He was on a podcast sometime last year. And one of the things that he said, which really sort of struck a chord with me, was that Power BI differs from other business intelligence products because it's a model-centric Power BI tool. And what he means by that, so if I look back on my career and the days when I worked with reporting services, when I worked with, you'll have to excuse me, I'm going to say the T word now, when I worked with Tableau, that was all about getting your data into a nice big fat table and doing analysis. So even just working with Excel and wrangling your data in Excel back in the old days, you tend to prepare your data into one big fat wide model. But Power BI, to get the best out of Power BI, you need to think more in data modeling terms. And what it really wants to sort of get the best out of it is a star schema. So you can go on the Microsoft Learn website, and there is various guidance on Power BI and why star schema is important and why you should always try and use a star schema for Power BI. What is a star schema? Put your hands up again. Another show of hands, interaction. Who knows what star schema is? Cool. I'm going to say that's the majority of the room, which is a good start. I'm not here to tell you about star schemas. I'm not really here to describe them. If it's a topic that you want to go really, really deep on, these are the two places to go. So you've got the Data Warehouse Toolkit by Ralph Kimball, which is 30 years old, pushing 30 years old. And then more recently, Chris Adamson wrote a book on the complete star schema reference. As I say, I'm not planning to go into that in detail now, but for anyone who's not familiar, the basic way to describe a star schema, you have two types of tables in your model: a fact table, which holds all your numbers, the things that you want to add up and measure, and then dimension tables, which are contextual information that you're going to slice and dice those measures by. Now, as I say, this originally came from a Power BI kind of place in my heart in terms of wanting to do this presentation. Who knows who this guy is? Awesome, about half a dozen people in the room. So this is Matthew Roach, also works for Microsoft, and he has this now legendary phrase, which is entitled Roach's Maxim of Data Transformation, that data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. Now, if you're working with Power BI on a day-to-day basis, it's got really, really good data transformation capability inside it. And if you were going to create a star schema and a data model, you could theoretically do that entirely inside Power BI. But really, especially if you're working at scale, it's much better to take care of that transformation upstream in some kind of data platform. Ultimately, what that means is, even though I'm delivering this to a Power BI user group, the techniques and tools I want to talk about aren't Power BI specific. They can be applied to any scenario where you might want to implement a star schema. So that could be in the good old days in a data warehouse. I'll continue to talk about data lakehouses because that's what I'm paid to do now. All these things like work well with a star schema. Who knows who this guy is? Nobody. That's the right answer. Nobody knows who this guy is. He used to be my boss in a job I worked in recently. It was a consultancy role, and a lot of time working in consultancy, all the customers just want to see the shiny interactive dashboards. And we got to the point where we sort of realized that the success of being able to deliver our projects was so pivoted so much on us getting our data model design right that we started basically including inside of all our proposals and statements of work this phrase that basically sort of says, look, the success of the data platform we're going to deliver is going to be really highly dependent on us being able to build an effective data model, which would always be a star schema. And so ultimately, the process and the tools and techniques I'm going to take you through tonight is the process that we implemented whilst I was working for James, which was a consultancy called Waterstones. I guess ultimately part of the message that's going to come across tonight, star schema, all the things. Anyone come across this on Twitter? Anyone much for Twitterer? So Kern Verbeek is Microsoft MVP, has been doing data warehousing for years, and it's one of his favorite memes. He's always sharing it. If your Power BI model is not performing well, it's probably because you haven't star schemas. Star schema are all the things. Now, the problem with people. Who in the room identifies as being a developer? Somebody who develops, I guess. Okay, roughly half. Who thinks they're more of a business user who interacts with sort of Power BI type content but doesn't necessarily actually do the building of it? Good mix. Developers can be very, very technical people, great at writing code, great at understanding tech, get excited about things like Spark and Vertipack engines and DAX and context transitions. Business users, on the other hand, understand the business throughout the coal face. They're doing the day job. They are like the people that are going to benefit from analytics platform that's going to be built, but ultimately aren't the people that are going to necessarily do the implementation. And as a developer, even though the business users know what they want, they know the results they want to get, but they're not always necessarily in the best place to explain what they need, which can leave some friction between that sort of technical side and that business front side. So what we want to try and do is we want to come up with some processes and some techniques so that the business users can effectively describe what it is they need to get out of a data platform or a Power BI data set. But then the developers can take that away and understand it in terms that's going to be useful for them to make sure they can do an effective implementation. So I'm going to take you through my requirements gathering process. Now, this is a process that has evolved over 4 or 5 years. I kind of first started running this as workshops when I was working with AO.com, as Alex mentioned previously. And I've kind of started doing it 4 or 5 years ago. It's something that I've refined over time and gotten to the point where when I was working for Waterson's, for that consultancy with James Bell, they liked my approach so well, they kind of standardized it, and that's what all the consultants started to use. I don't want to get all preachy and tell everybody in the room, this is how everybody should go off and design star schemas. I've kind of, in the process that I arrived at, took inspiration from various different places. And if there were bits I didn't like, I got rid of them. And if there were bits that I did like, I kept them. And I probably had my own spin here and there as well. What I'd like people to be able to take away from this evening is maybe a bit of inspiration in terms of, right, oh, I hadn't thought about that like that before. And that seems like a good idea. And maybe some of these things you might incorporate into your own processes. If you want to steal it verbatim and do it exactly like this, go for that as well. But yeah, I don't want to sort of make out that I've invented this fabulous new thing that everybody should be doing. And absolutely, I've plagiarized most of this from other places. So there's 2 particular kind of tools or techniques that I want to sort of discuss this evening: Beam and sum modeling. Interaction time again. Who's heard of Beam? Oh, 2. Okay, cool. Who's heard of sum modeling? Oh, 1 person. That's okay, cool. People that have come across sum modeling is quite rare, and I'll get to one of the reasons for that in a moment. So a brief overview of Beam. Basically, it is a technique that is described in this book, Agile Data Warehouse Design, which is a book by a guy called Lawrence Core. The asterisk at the end doesn't really mean anything. It's not a footnote. It just almost like represents a star schema at the end of the process. BEAM stands for Business Event Analysis and Modeling. And personally, in my sort of journey and in my kind of data career, coming across this terminology was kind of a bit of a turning point for me. Because when we talk about analyzing data or designing some kind of data platform, thinking of it in terms of actually, we're not just analyzing data, we're effectively collecting information about events and then describing that event. So if we almost start thinking about each transaction isn't just like a transaction in a system, it's an event, something happened. So to throw out some silly examples, well, not silly, they're quite real examples, but a piece of stock moves, that's an event. An employee is hired, that's an event. A customer buys a product, that's an event. So for me, there was a bit of a mindset change when I first came across that terminology. There's 2 particular parts of Beam that I'd like to focus on. So that's the 3 Ds and the 7 Ws, which I will come to soon. Sum modeling, background on this. So I described it as being mythical in origin. Now, the reason for that, if you go on the internet now and try and Google the term sum modeling, there's virtually nothing out there. There's no book you can turn to. There's very little written guidance or much out there that describes it to you. It kind of feels like it's kind of almost like a word of mouth type practice and something that's been like passed down through the generations from data professional to data professional. I first came across it when a woman called Emma Zamba, I'm never going to be able to say it, Emma Z, presented at SQLBits in 2016, I think it was. That was my first exposure to it. And then anyone know a chap called Pete Moore? He's taught at this user group before, but like not for ages. He was working as an independent consultant, and he did some work with a company I was working for at the time, Travel Counsellors. He came in and ran some modelling workshops. Terry McCann, he is one of the founders and directors at Advancing Analytics as well. If you go on YouTube and search for Terry McCann's sun modeling, he did like a 10-minute lightning talk at a SQL Relay event that covers sun modeling as well. The thing that those three guys all have in common is this guy, Mark Whithorn. So he's a professor of analytics at the University of Dundee. He basically those three people all studied underneath him, and this is a technique that apparently he teaches. I've only ever come across this technique secondhand, so I'm like passing on my interpretation, and there might be some Chinese whispers going on. Potentially the way I do it isn't necessarily pure to the way that Mark teaches it, and that's kind of why I kind of describe it as being mythical in origin. So when we talk about sun modeling, we talk about the data model and these three sort of concepts of a data model. And again, I just want to reiterate, this is kind of data model for an analytics purpose. They're doing analytical processing as opposed to sort of the data model you might do for some kind of transactional design. So we talk about a user model, a physical model, and a logical model. Now, the user model should be, Power BI guys should recognize this. So the user model is how end users interact with that data. So it often comes in the form of charts, graphs, and grids. Now, if you're gathering requirements for a data project, this can still be quite useful because you can look at that, and as a data professional, you might say, right, okie doke, well, I know I need to build a star schema. And I can look at this and I can sort of say, right, okie doke, well, if they want to see revenue by product description, so, right, okie doke, well, I'm probably going to have some kind of product dimension that's got my products in there then. I know that I'm going to have some kind of sales revenue type facts. Then we can look at this and sort of say, all right, okay, so they also want to see unit quantity over a time period. So we're going to want to have some kind of date dimension too. And then the grids can often give like extra attributes that might go into dimensions. So in this example, we've got like brand and category description. So it can be a good starting point, but these user models are often quite narrow in scope and often just perform like a very specific purpose. Whereas when you're developing a data model, you want it to be a little bit more holistic. You want your star schema to be capture information that's going to be able to answer multiple questions and give people the opportunity to drill down into it and do a bit more analysis. So then next up, you've got the physical model. Now, that's a screenshot of a Power BI data set. The other sort of version of a physical model you often see is like a database ERD diagram. Now, as a developer, as a technical person, if somebody gives you that, you could probably go away and build it. So from the ERD diagram, you're going to have things like your data types included, cardinality, maybe some crow's foot notation, all these kind of things. From a developer perspective, you'd probably be happy days, but can you really go out to your customers or your business users or your stakeholders and just say, yeah, can you just tell me what scheme you want me to design on? I'll just go ahead and do it, because they don't think in these terms. So what we need is something that bridges that gap between our user models, where our users interact with our data, and our physical models, which is the thing the developers need to build, which is where the logical model comes in. So this is an example of a logical model. It's supposed to represent kind of the objects that will be in the star schema in the data set. It's supposed to be done in business language. So we're not talking about techie terms and specific table names or field references or data types. It's business type terms, but kind of shows the interaction between all of the data. And the process for creating a logical model is to do a sun model. Okay. So the way I'd go about this when I wanted to collaboratively design this star schema would be to run a workshop. Now, back in the olden days when I started doing this, that meant getting the right people in a room, huddle around a whiteboard and knock out some design and ask some questions. The world we live in now, post-pandemic, it's all virtual. So there's a couple of products there you can use for virtual whiteboarding. I've used both Miro and Miro quite a lot, and they're pretty good. MS Whiteboard, I think, mostly comes packaged with a lot of Microsoft products. It's a bit rubbish, but if it's all you've got access to at a push, that can work. I've seen people even do it in just using PowerPoint or Visio as well. Could be some other options for you there. And who should you invite? So get your business users involved. From the technical developers in here, has anyone implemented a project and a data platform where basically they built what they thought was right and didn't really ask the users? Put your hands up. Sweet. So I've done it, 100%. We built something on some exciting tech. and showed it to them, and they were like, oh, that's really exciting, but it doesn't really do what we want to do. This is about collaboration and getting your business users involved. So yeah, those people need to come along. You still need to have some people from your technical team to run the workshops, to be fair. And it's good to have two people. So someone who's going to facilitate and ask the questions, somebody else to make notes, and possibly even do the diagramming. So again, in the old world, when I did this in person, I was around a whiteboard. I was personally quite comfortable to facilitate and make notes as I went. When I've done this virtually and I'm trying to ask people questions and fiddle about with some wacky online whiteboarding technology, I get all fingers and thumbs. So it's definitely great to have two people involved from that perspective. For your workshop, we're just trying to focus in on one business process. If we're talking about implementing like an enterprise scale data platform, we don't want to boil the ocean. We're not looking to try and design a schema that's going to cover sales and logistics and aftercare and all that. It's kind of right, focus on one business process, and from the business get 3 to 5 people who understand that process, who live it and breathe it and know what goes on end to end in terms of that process. So the 3Ds, which is the first element of BEAM that we're to talk about. The 3Ds are discover an event, which is done by very simply asking the question of the people in the workshop, who does what? So who does what? Hiring manager hires employee. That's an answer to who does what. Warehouse operative moves stock. That's a terrible example to try and bleed out, but you get the idea. Customer buys product. So customer buys product in terms of the example I'm going to go through today is the who does what. I'm talking about, we're going to look at a fictional sales process. And when I say to my stakeholders, okay, you want to look at doing sales today, who does what? And the answer to that in this scenario, fictitious scenario, is customer buys a product. So once you've discovered your event, the second D is describe the event. And to describe the event, we're going to use the 7 Ws, which I'll go to in another slide. And then as we describe the event, we want to document the event as well. And to document the event, we're going to use some modeling. Now, BEAM, if anyone is familiar with it, comes with a whole host of documentation. There's templates you can download off the internet, all sorts of Excel spreadsheets and documents that you can fill in. If you work in a big organization, you've got a full-time BA, possibly you might want to go down that route and use the BEAM documentation. But I've personally found especially when I've worked in smaller development teams, it's absolute overkill. And for me, some modeling is just a more lightweight way to do that documentation of the event. So discover the event, and we've asked the question, who does what? And we're going to say a customer buys the product. So next, describe the event. This is really, really pretentious. I did English literature at college. This is a quote from Rudyard Kipling, who said, I kept 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names are what and why and when and how and where and who. The 7 Ws is basically an updated version of that. You have to forgive the fact that how and how many are tenuous Ws. They have W in them. They have a worse sound there or thereabouts. But basically, once we've discovered our event, the customer buys a product. We want to know, right, okay, let's expand on that. Who's involved in it? What's involved? When does it happen? Where does it happen? Why and how did it happen? And how many is that kind of, what are the units we want to measure? What are the potential key KPIs we want around that particular event? So then we move to the documenting. So in terms of creating a document, this is almost like a some modeling template, similar to what I've used previously. So for my who does what, customer buys product, I've almost put in my header there. I put a reminder of my 7 Ws on the left-hand side. Change the order very slightly because I've put how many at the top. Now, the reason for that is because I personally prefer to start with how many. I've seen this process taught through where they've done the how many is the last thing. I personally like to do it first. A yellow circle because the sun's yellow, isn't it? So when the customer buys the product, what are the how many's we want to know about? What are the numbers that we're going to want to aggregate? What are those headline KPIs that I want to think about? So for a customer buying a product, here's a few examples. I might want to know the revenue associated with that event. Probably going to want to know my profit, and to work that out, I'm going to have to know my costs. Once I've got that profit, I can figure out margin percentage, and we're going to know how many items were sold, and potentially how many of those items as well. So how many, it's the things that you want to measure, they go in the middle of your sum. So next question down, who? There's a clue here, because when we discovered our event and said who does what, we already answered it. It's at the top, customer buys product. So the first thing I'm going to stick on here is a customer. Now this dot on the sum model represents the granularity or the grain of that dimension. We're saying for every unit of revenue, there is one customer. So that kind of covers some of that cardinality element. Having sort of arrived at, right, well, the who is the customer, we don't just stop there. Say to the people in the room, okie doke. So you want to be able to like slice and dice your revenue by customer, but what else do you want to know about your customer? So they might want to know things like their customer name, maybe the date of birth. They can do some age demographics, maybe gender, maybe demographic group. Anyone come across Mosaic group in doing analytics and things like that? Maybe that kind of thing as well. For the sake of demonstration, I've kept it brief in terms of those attributes, but theoretically, you just keep exploring that and exploring that. Well, what else do you need to know about your customers? Capture all that information as much as you can. Then we go to the what. Again, we've already got a clue, because when we discovered our event, we said who does what. It's at the top, customer buys product. So product's going to be our next item on the sum model. It gets a new spoke. Again, there's going to be one product per unit of revenue. So we get the blob for the product. What else would you like to know about your product? So things like possibly your product codes, the product name, maybe a description, maybe a category, maybe a color, that kind of thing. The next thing that Beam will recommend that you do after who and what is the when. So customer buys product, well, when did they buy it? And I will guarantee you, if anyone does walk away from this and end up doing some modeling, you'll always have some kind of date dimension, because you're going to want to understand that passage of time. Now, date can get interesting, because in terms of some modeling, quite often with dates as well, you want to be able to roll that up. So you're not just necessarily going to look at daily sales, you're going to look at sales by month or sales by quarter and sales by year. When we capture that in terms of looking at dates, if it's hierarchical, so if it's something you want to roll up, you do it in a straight line. So for customer and product, we've got spokes going off in different directions to represent those different attributes. If those attributes are hierarchical, represent them in a straight line. You can have more than one hierarchy associated if you want to. So weeks don't go into months, but you might have an alternative hierarchy where you roll up by sales week and maybe financial period and financial year, for argument's sake. Off the back of when, we go for where. Another good one from a retail perspective. So I'm going to say in this fictional retail example, store location might be something they want to slice and dice by. Similar thing. So there you go, Lewis. We've got latitude and longitude for doing that analysis. Happy days. We can use our API. But something like a store location, again, that's something that would be hierarchical. So we've represented it as a straight line. The why and the how. So why and how can be a bit abstract. For this demonstration, I'm going to say, well, why did they buy it? Because it was on promotion. So let's have some promotion details so we can slice and dice, see which promotions raised what revenue. We might have something like promo code and description. And then the how, I'm going to talk about payment type. So how did the customer buy the product? Well, they either used cash, card or finance, and who was the payment provider associated with that? That's a completed sum model. Now, I've had at least two people who, when I've kind of explained some modeling to them, they've said, oh, that's it's like a mind map for your data, if anyone's ever come across mind mapping. So quite a nice little observation. But the way I think about this, I've now got a blueprint or a wireframe, of a star schema. That is ultimately what a star schema is. We've got the sun in the middle, which represents our fact table. All these entities around the edges represent the dimensions. We've built that collaboratively. We've basically asked our business users to describe that data to us in their own terms, and we've recorded that. And ultimately, we've provided something that you could probably hand off to a developer, and they can now build a star schema either into your data platform or into Power BI if that's where you're choosing to do it. So a few final thoughts on this, and a few things that I want to call out to an extent as well. When we do those 7 Ws, ask them multiple times. So again, for the sake of brevity, I asked, well, the who's associated with customer buys products. I stopped once I'd answered the question once. Don't stop there. Carry on asking it. Because from a sales perspective, you might say, well, who else is involved in a customer buying a product? Well, the salesman. So you might do some analytics around sales. In terms of the where, when we said, right, we've got the store location, well, you might want to capture the customer location as well. So don't ask the question once and then leave it at that. Keep asking it until you've exhausted all possibilities. Conversely, if for some of those 7 Ws, nobody can think of a suitable answer, it's fine. You don't have to have an answer to every question, especially the how and the why can be very, very abstract. So if you ask somebody the how when it comes to the event and they're like, I don't really know, that's fine, don't worry about it. Make sure you're doing one sum model per event. So I've held workshops with stakeholders before and we're looking at sales and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we should bring stock levels in here. It's like, no, stock level is a different business process, a different event. You need to keep it focused on the process and the event that you're looking at. And you can hold multiple workshops if necessary as well. So in terms, even for the same event, you might sometimes want to get different audiences in. So for customer buys products, you might have somebody who's customer centric, or you might have some people that are more like marketing centric and want to know those elements, and you might have operations people that are more salesperson centric. So you can hold multiple events and consolidate afterwards. If you do end up with multiple sum models, so if you're doing quite a small Power BI implementation, one sum model might sort you out, you might be good. If you're in a wider enterprise data platform type implementation, you're going to have lots of different processes in there. One good thing you can do with those business processes is consolidate them into a bus matrix. Who is familiar with a bus matrix? Okay, so a bus matrix is an artifact that Kimball references. If I do this again, I might include an example of what a bus matrix is. But basically, you put your business processes down the left, your dimensions across the top, and then you can see where they intersect. So you can see that actually, when I study customer buys products, yes, I need to know about my customer from that perspective, and yes, I need to know about my products. When I look at stock level, well, the customer's not involved in that, but when I did my sales model and I already had my product data in there, I can now reuse that artifact because on the matrix, I can see that that actually refers to multiple processes. You can do this before data discovery. So I've seen different approaches with this. When I talk about data discovery, and I guess I've probably got my consultant hat on, that's kind of going into a business and trying to look at their data and understand it. What I found quite effective sometimes is doing this exercise before then. So you're not kind of influenced by how you know their data is already structured in their transactional systems. You're just talking to business users about their interpretation of how things all fit together. I've seen it done the other way around as well, where kind of from a developer perspective, they've looked first. If you've got shy stakeholders, sometimes that's useful. My preference is to do it before the data discovery. Don't get bogged down in what you already know about the data. So what I mean by this is try and approach those 7W questions from a perspective of, well, ideally, what would you like? If your stakeholders, when you're talking about your customer, say, oh, actually, I'd really like to know shoe size. So we can do some understanding about whether or not people buy more soup or baked beans depending on their shoe size. To a slightly flippant example, but record it and document it anyway. Now, when you come to your implementation, you're probably going to look in your CRM on your business system and you're going to say, really sorry, shoe size isn't there. We don't capture that as part of our sales journey. But sometimes what you can do with the Sun model is you can actually use that as a device to do some kind of gap analysis and feed that back to your development teams so that actually if there's a piece of data you don't capture today, maybe they can look to capture that at some future date. You might want to use your logical model to go away and actually design a physical model. Again, I've done this both ways. So I've done it whereby we've just literally done the Sun model, handed that over to the development team, and they've gone, yep, understand that, nice one, we'll go away and build it. Again, in consultancy life, quite often there's been a bit more kind of reassurance for the client where they've said, actually, can you turn that into a proper physical model with an ERD, with your data types, with your crow's foot notation and sort of all the relationships built in and my primary keys and foreign keys defined. You can do that if you like, and I've seen it done, but don't feel you have to. And finally, don't treat this as the finished design. Don't treat this as right, well, we said in that workshop that we was going to build, and now we've got to build it. Still be happy to go through that iterative approach, and once you actually dive into the data and start building things, you might want to change things up and make alterations. So don't get, start with that as the target you'd like to aim for, but ultimately it might change during implementation. And I don't know if that was supposed to be some kind of buzzer that I'm timed out, but anyway, that's everything. Has anyone got any questions?